Remember that happy days are here again? That's the Democrats sing that. Happy days are here again. The sky above is clear again. That was written by a Buffalonian.
Was his name Yellen?
Yep, that was his name.
Happy days are here again, the skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again. All together shout it now, there's no one who can doubt it now. So let's tell the world about it now. Happy days are here again.
How long have we been in these complexes? Like 13,
Huh?
12 or 13 years have we been here? No, or 10.
Here, we've been here 13 years.
Can you believe it? Time flies when you're having fun. He had the heart surgery here, he had the ear surgery.
My grandmother didn't mention the neck surgery from 2 weeks prior, which left my grandfather in the neck brace, though. 13 years ago when they moved in, like she said, it was just 2 years prior to my family, my mother, my father, and my sister, leaving the city of Buffalo after a job transfer at my father's company. We were the first to leave Buffalo since my ancestors came through Ellis and settled in Buffalo in the 1800s and early 1900s. I recall being at a baseball game prior to the move. I hate baseball. I played when I was younger. I cried my first game, and I think that my father yelled at one of the volunteer referees a little bit later in that game. My dad has a short wick. Anyway, that baseball game before we moved was a stew of emotion and panic, but a weird kind of panic, like a false panic that only humans get because of foresight. Obviously, I wasn't really watching the baseball game I was at. I was more interested in non-exit exit plans. I was thinking about part-time jobs, and I just had to stay. Anyway, the Buffalo team went 72-72 that year, according to the records. I come home, and I think a lot about Buffalo in general, because leaving the city isn't normal. It's like jumping ship. And it's why, even in the 21st century, we were called gypsies when we left. But it seems silly that with over a decade having passed, that the feeling of being an economic refugee from a dying city is still strong, and it's burnt into your mind and burnt into your heart. I came home this time to re-experience the city's narrative. And I know that every city has one, but Buffalo's is so ingrained in the people, which makes leaving so sacrilege and personal, because every time a census comes out smaller, and every time a home makes way for the growing urban prairie in the city, you can't help but feel like your absence is a sin of omission. Last year, one of Buffalo's churches even got out.
St. Gerard's on the corner of East Delavan and Bailey Avenues could end up in Atlanta, Georgia someday. The Buffalo Catholic Diocese approved a proposal months ago to have it moved piece by piece from the place where it has stood since 1911.
The shrinking population means less churches are needed, obviously, and a church in Atlanta volunteered to move it down.
I think that's wrong. I think it's architectural strip mining. I think that it's a danger that in 100 years we're going to have nothing left. To me, the opposite of progress are more vacant lots in the city of Buffalo.
But with dozens of other empty churches, I'm not really sure what kind of reuse is possible. You'd have to start at the very beginning. In 1901, Buffalo, thanks to its nearby honeymoon capital, Niagara Falls, was home to an exposition of invention and was a showcase of electricity. And the president at the time, William McKinley, came to marvel at its wonder.
Here in Buffalo. Yes, we stay in Buffalo, it's WBNY. Yes, in Buffalo, it's WBNY. 1300.
The problem is, McKinley never left. The president was shot and killed the next day, giving the city the morbid honor of being one of 3 sites of presidential assassinations. The exposition closed, and most of the site was knocked down. But Buffalo still had industry, and even though it gave up Niagara's light to New York, which it still powers, it had steel. And steel, in return, had tens of thousands of Buffalonians on the clock. The Bethlehem Steel Complex was a city in and of itself. As tens of thousands flocked to jobs, tens of thousands were pushed out in the 1970s and 1980s. It was sort of a domino effect for industry, and over 250,000 people spread out over the country over 2 decades, a diaspora of massive proportions, which still leaves behind its ghosts. Mostly in the haunting, empty, galvanizing coke plants. Luckily, hopes rose in the 90s after a few tough decades. I remember this time because the city's eternally mediocre Buffalo Bills were going to the Super Bowl in 1991. The missed field goal lost the championship for the team. Luckily for the city, the team made it back to the next year's Super Bowl, but they lost to the Washington Redskins. And the next year's Super Bowl, they lost to the Dallas Cowboys. And the Super Bowl after that, they lost to the Dallas Cowboys again. They haven't been back since. It's not a mystery that leaving was such an issue. It's not family or history or friends alone that keep you on Lake Erie. It's because when you leave, you're part of the problem. When people leave, it's kind of saying that you give up on the narrative of urban hope for Buffalo. And it leaves an even heavier weight for those who stay behind. But there's a certain beauty coming back. It's a rarity to find a shared narrative for a city in the New South, in Atlanta or Charlotte, or even in New York, where neighborhoods reign and people come and go, unable to survive. Going back to Buffalo, you're always going back to something where nothing ever really changed. And even if it's its downfall, for those of us in the diaspora that have experienced the ways it stays the same in a world where too much is changing and too much is unfamiliar, it's interesting to think that the narrative of loyalty is shared. And I found, even if I am a gypsy or a deserter or jumping ship, Buffalo will still welcome me back. And it'll still smell the same and look the same and feel the same. And generally, it'll be just what I remember. And I'm lucky to have that, because who the hell has that these days?
Settlers. Shop and save at Settlers. 998 Broadway in Buffalo. 998 Broadway. Go there today.
He don't really
Run for the roses.
raise ours that much, because the other people he raises, well, like Papa does shit for around here.